Yoakum, president and founder of Marquee Search. Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Marquee Matchup. This is a great day for me, and I hope it'll be a great day for you too, because I'm joined by Christa Stout. I'm fortunate enough to call Christa a friend and someone in the industry that I admire very much. So Christa, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It was a nice day in Portland for the sporting universe yesterday. Your current employer and your former employer, the Blazers, got a massive victory behind 61 points and Damian Lillard for the hunt for that last playoff spot in the West. And then your former employer won the MLS's back championship, which is not a small thing because it comes with the Champions League entry berth, which is a big deal too. So nice day in Portland. We were in the news for the right reasons yesterday.
It was huge. It was a big one, and I won't ask you to pick allegiances between those two teams, but
I can root for both. They never play each other, right?
Follow both. That's what I was going to say. Appreciate that.
You do. I can't wait to go to either of those games. I mean, it's going to happen at some point. But
me too.
Yes, I look forward to it. So if you don't mind, I will take a moment, just make a quick introduction, and then we can jump into some questions if that's all right. Mm-hmm. So Christa is the Vice President of Innovation and Impact for the Portland Trailblazers and Executive Director of the Trailblazers Foundation. She oversees the Blazers' community involvement, youth engagement efforts. Her team manages the organization's social and environmental impact work in conjunction with local nonprofit organizations, key team partners, and the Trailblazer Foundation, which is the team's primary channel for their charitable fundraising and giving. Before joining the Trailblazers in early 2014, Christa managed the Portland Timbers Community Relations Department for 3 years. She received her undergraduate degree at Connecticut College and followed that by getting her MBA in International Business from Middlebury Institute of International Studies. After her advanced degree, Christa entered the nonprofit space, working internationally in South Africa, Australia, Central and South America, and Europe before starting in team sports. Christa is a Business Journal 40 Under 40 member and has been a featured speaker at South by Southwest, as well as other prestigious conferences. So, wow, you're truly a global citizen. And for us in Portland, we're lucky that you seem to have a homing beacon on to come back to Portland. So that's good news here.
Nice of you to say. Thank you, Jeff.
Absolutely. So if we start out on the family side, if you don't mind, we both are parents of young kids. I'm always trying to learn, hacks or learn best practices, but how have you and your husband balanced this work and home life the last 5 months or so?
Oh man, I would love any hacks from you as well. I feel like we're literally doing it one day at a time. Like my brother played tennis growing up, and that was always the message, right? Just like 1 point at a time, just take it 1 point at a time. And I feel like that is how I'm getting through every single day. So a lot of help from family, a lot of help from friends, and just literally taking it day by day to figure out, what we're going to do next. But it's been a journey for everyone. I think what I just keep reminding myself and my team is like, we're all going through something, whatever it is. Everyone has stuff they're going through, and we just got to be patient and we got to be kind. And that's the only way we're going to get through all this. So
that's the kind of empathetic leadership I'd expect from you. It's a postcard day, obviously a great day in the Pacific Northwest, and summer's great. It's just, you start to worry about, the fall and winter where you go outdoors a little different. But it's day by day that's a good mantra. It's a good mantra. So you have a really interesting title. I don't know a lot of people that have the title and the combined jobs that you have as well. So what do you do? What is the work that you're involved in?
It's exactly what it sounds like, Jeff. I feel like it's pretty clear.
VP of Innovation and Impact.
It's not clear at all. It's everyone's first question. They're like, that's a fake title. What does that mean? But I mean, basically what it does mean is like, I'm responsible for overseeing the team and the strategy around driving innovation for our company. So internally and externally. And then, just making sure that we as a company are always prioritizing having a positive impact, whether that's on the community, on our fans, on our brand, on our business. So there is actually a lot of overlap there, even though they sound like two very different things. And it's also interesting, right? Because innovation, it's like strategy. Everyone sort of defines it in their own kind of way. And that works, right? Like it works for different industries and different teams. But for us, and I think, it's definitely changed a lot from pre-COVID till now, but for us, that's everything from, figuring out new revenue streams, what safety looks like, what's the fan experience look like in a new, safer environment? What does digital fan engagement look like? How is that different from what it used to look like? What are our internal processes and efficiencies that we can kind of, whether it's like bringing in new software or other things that we're doing that is improving our internal operations as well. So kind of runs the gamut. And I'm, happy to give you some examples of some of the stuff we're working on, but basically, in a nutshell, trying to keep our company thinking about what we should be doing now to ensure that we have a successful business in the future.
Okay, so from an innovation perspective, and maybe this is asking a little bit like, who's your favorite child, but do you have a favorite initiative since you've been there that you've been a part of from just a, I guess if you think about innovating and doing something that you're just like, that was cool, or that was fun, or that just really paid off?
It's a great question. So I'll give you a simple example that kind of combines corporate social responsibility and innovation, that it's like, this is the kind of stuff that I love when this comes up. So we had a person on our team Natalie, who has a background in sustainability, environmental sustainability. And she just asked, like, why is it that we have these like printed programs? Like, couldn't we figure out a better way to do this? And has led the charge to move our printed programs onto our app. So now in Orlando, like, you can go to our app and see our digital Rip City magazine, which again, super simple. Like, most people wouldn't be like, that's the definition of innovation, but it's like, yeah, we have digital platforms to do this. We then are able to know the data behind what people are looking at, what they're interested in. We can drive more people to it. It doesn't have an impact on the environment, blah, 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 blah. So, it's just a simple example of where there's so many like little things we can do around our company to both make a positive impact, but also sort of look at things from a new lens, if that makes sense. So that's a simple example. I think, some of the bigger stuff that we're working on that I'm really excited about, I can't quite talk about yet, but if we have a follow-up.
It's in the stealth bomber kind of stage right now.
What's that?
It's in the stealth bomber stage, kind of back in the hangar.
Exactly. I think I have to get some more like communications approvals before I can start talking about them. But so yeah, the bigger things we'll have a follow-up conversation to talk about, but there's lots of little stuff like that that's just exciting to see.
That's cool. You're on the front edge and the leading foot, and really a person internally that, again, the impact piece, that's a word I love, and innovation might be overused sometimes, but it truly, when you're talking about the kind of stuff you're describing, it really is that. So that's really fun.
Yeah. Sometimes it's actually really simple things that make a big difference. So.
That well said. So clearly I described earlier a really interesting professional path. So how did you get to this place, where you are now, your role now? How did you leave school, maybe even between, your undergraduate, graduate, but how did you, the CSR thread we've talked about a lot because my wife is in that space and it's very passionate, family kind of a topic, but how did you navigate into team sports doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. So it's so funny, right? Like in hindsight, everything makes so much sense. It's so easy to understand. You're like, oh yeah, everywhere I went, everywhere I worked, I was able to, come up with a new solution or implement a new program or start a nonprofit or whatever it is that adds some kind of value either to the community or to a company or to an entity of some kind. Right. So like in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, my whole career has been about sports, social change, and innovation, right? Like how am I driving new initiatives or programs that add value? And yet at the time when you're 22 and have no idea what you're doing, you're just like saying yes to anything to try to figure out what you can do and what someone will pay you to do and what you might be good at and hope that it leads somewhere, right? So I think it's sort of a different story if I'm telling it in hindsight or thinking of it in actual chronological time. And I think, the reality is I got very lucky. I got to have some pretty amazing opportunities early on in my career. I was working in the Dominican Republic for an infant and maternal health nonprofit, and the chair of the board, was really excited about providing opportunities for kids around sports in the developing world. And he's like, I just need someone that can like figure out how to run this organization, or like start an organization and run it, and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, I mean, I'll try. And so like I got to start this side project that turned into a whole organization, and I just got really fortunate to get to do stuff like that along my path. And again, looking back, it was all related to sport and the power that sport can provide to have a positive impact on the world. But again, there was always that thread around like, what are you doing that's, launching this program around Colombia, leading this initiative in Australia or whatnot. It's like, what can I bring that can add value to whatever I'm working on, which is like for us sort of the definition of innovation.
So, and that got you, I mean, you could have stayed that track and gone to, Nike, Adidas, or moved somewhere, big cities, that have a lot of CSR types of programs, really large corporate powerhouses. How did it come down to the team sports? I mean, you played sports growing up and you were a very competitive athlete. Was it luck of the draw, or did you go out and kind of go, I want to work for a sports team like the Timbers or something like that?
Yeah, I appreciate how you rephrased that when I didn't answer your question. So, which is great. So how did I end up in team sports?
It's okay if some people, they fall into it. Some people are just, that's what they want to do all their life, and they know that. I didn't know that it was a career option, quite honestly. When I'm a little older, and there were no programs when I was at Arizona State. I was like, I didn't know you could work in team sports like this. I knew you could work at Nike and Adidas, but that was different,
So it's funny you say that, because so coming out of undergrad, so I played sports my whole life, right? Like lots of sports all the time, through college, after college, all of that. And even I played professionally in Eastern Europe, and even then didn't know there were jobs in professional sports, right? Like I saw that there were people working for the club I was playing for, but it still never occurred to me that there was like a job or a career path, just because I just didn't know that. I don't know, I just didn't have any exposure to it. And so once I had that experience and realized like, oh, maybe like there might be more here, and I started paying more attention to professional sports in the US, which like growing up, it was just not a big thing for my family. Then when I was in grad school, I had a professor that said like, he just asked like, what do you really care about? Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't even know what's out. I don't even know what's possible. And he was like, well, just think about what like really gives you energy. Like what energizes you? And I was like, what energizes me and has always energized me is sports, and like the value that sports has given to me as a human, and the confidence it's given to me, and the opportunity that I see in what sport does for kids and young people. Like there's just so much power when done well. There's so much power there. And he was like, oh, then you should go work for like a sports team that does good. And I was like, what? And so it was like when I first learned about CSR and all that, and then got super lucky that the Timbers were hiring for a coordinator of corporate partnerships when I was coming out of my MBA, which was an amazing opportunity. And I got to work there. I got to work there for almost 3 years, got to work for Mike Golub directly, which like I learned so much in 3 years. It was crazy. And, pretty early on went from the corporate partnerships team to the community team, which was a little bit more in line with what I was super passionate about. But now, interestingly enough, now I work more probably with the corporate partnerships team than I do with the community team.
Interesting how that all kind of goes full circle sometimes.
Yes, for sure.
And how commercial, and community, when tied together, can really, really, when you're not working in silos, how much power that you can have in an organization like the Blazers.
Exactly. And how much more good you can drive when you're working in partnership.
So you worked for two well-known sports properties. They're very powerful in our community. They're very involved in our communities. I've always felt like that we're lucky. I don't think every sports team is like that. And you're at the center of that. So what's your view of the power, responsibility that professional sports organizations have in their respective communities?
Yeah, I think it's more clear now than ever that we have a huge responsibility. So it's been CSR in sports, I don't even think it was a thing in like the early 2000s, right? And so it's developed a ton over the last 20 years. And now it just feels like everybody gets it, everyone expects it. And that's the biggest difference, honestly, as we look at like youth and future fans. It's not even a question of, you know, does this team do good stuff in the community or not? It's like, if they don't, I don't want to be a fan. Like if this company isn't doing good things, I don't want to buy their stuff. So that's sort of that's what Gen Z is saying, at least right now, and how they're acting. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I mean, my general philosophy is like, not only is it an amazing opportunity, but like people expect it now. So.
Well, you hear words like a public trust, you know, in terms of how organizations are viewed. But again, we know that some don't really feel that way. You know, it's all about the bottom line or however they want to operate, which it's nice again to have your organization and you have the right people running it, and it's about leadership. But then it's about delivering on that mandate. So that's good.
For sure.
And I mean, now it's like 150 days into a pandemic, you know, global health crisis. Nobody had that playbook, as far as I know. So we lost it. But we've had to get some sort of a rhythm, you know, at some sort of a cadence to our lives. And some days it's easier than others. But how would you talk about your organization? How do you think they've handled it? And how have you been communicating as a leader in your organization with your people to kind of keep everyone together and moving forward in a time where you have to do that, I guess?
Yeah. So I feel like, to your point, like no one knows how to do what we're doing and how to deal with what we're dealing with right now. And so I think that's actually an important thing, just to remind people that everyone is looking for clarity and looking for answers and looking for direction. And part of it is like, we don't have it. Like we don't have answers. We don't know when next season's going to start. We don't know what next season's going to look like. We don't know anything about our industry, honestly, for right now. And so people just kind of have to be okay with that ambiguity, which is super stressful for a ton of people. In a weird way, like I kind of like chaos and uncertainty. Like I enjoy the puzzle of sort of trying to put things together. But so I think from an internal perspective, just like over communicating, being especially with everything on Zoom, right? You don't have like those 2 minutes before a meeting, 2 minutes after a meeting to just like check in and smile at someone and say hi. And like, it's weird when you realize how much that influences people's perception of where they are in the company. So just over communication, lots of positive feedback and reinforcement on stuff, because that's another thing that you miss when you don't have those miscellaneous encounters in person, where you're not just like, hey, great point in that meeting, like thanks for bringing that up, right? Like that's the little stuff like that like you realize it goes a long way when it's all gone. So internally, we've just been really trusting people, given a lot of flexibility, a lot of understanding, over communicating, and also in some ways trying to like repurpose people where necessary, where it makes sense. So like we have an innovation hub where employees can submit ideas that are like new and interesting and innovative to the company. And we got like 88 submissions in our first 2 months in COVID, which was awesome. Like so many interesting and cool ideas. And because of the focus areas that we asked for ideas around, there was a huge burden then put on those teams to execute. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of pivoted and asked people on the team that had a little bit more bandwidth to jump in and sort of project manage those ideas up till completion. And it was cool, right? It was a training opportunity for them. It created more content and assets for us to sell and engage with fans on. And it was sort of a fun and new challenge, but you just like stuff like that just kind of comes up and you have to sort of figure it out as you go. So, that's sort of internally how we've been addressing it. And then externally, for me, I think what's been most interesting and exciting is, again, sort of the convergence of innovation and impact in COVID, right? Where you're in a environment where people are stressed and scared and have health scares and all kinds of stuff going on. And early on, we as a large brand that helps the community, we're getting tons of requests from the community, from people, from nonprofits, asking for all kinds of things, from like reusable water bottles to kitchen space or what any kinds of things. Meanwhile, we had all these corporate partners and a huge facility that wanted to do good and try to like help in some ways, right? So people were coming out of the woodworks with, oh, I'm giving away free meals to people that are working essential jobs and whatnot. So we created basically like a resource center as a hub of connecting all of those things and all of those people, which like a bunch of people did. So it wasn't in and of itself all that innovative, but the way that it worked, like there's hundreds of things on there and you can filter and you can search and you can find from like a free yoga class for a working parent, for adults, free yoga class for kids, access to free food if that's what you need. So it sort of just like ran the gamut of things people needed and were looking for at the time. And it just felt like everything was so confusing. And so I was like having it all in one place for our fans and community to access, which was cool, while also giving exposure to partners and companies that were doing some really great stuff. So that's kind of how we've been, just two examples of sort of what we've been doing internally and externally.
With a great backdrop that you got right now, did you advocate work from home before? I mean, were you an advocate of it? Did you get a chance to do it? How do you feel after 5 months of it in terms of work from home?
I mean, yes and no. I've always been supportive of staff that needed and wanted to work from home for various reasons, right? So I'm very aware that there are people who are more introverted than I am that do better when they're not around other people, and am supportive of kind of whatever people need to be successful in their jobs. And it's so hard to be on a conference call, as an example, right? Like where everyone's talking, or just like all the memes about conference calls are like infuriating and so accurate. So for me, I think it's like a good example and a good microcosm of what COVID has done sort of across all avenues for us, right? So like I never used Zoom before COVID, and now I'm obsessed, and now I feel like I could work from home multiple days a week and be just as successful, right? Do you use Apple Pay?
Yes.
Did you use Apple Pay before COVID?
I don't think so.
So you are, sorry, it's airplane. You would be in the vast majority if that is true. I just started using it in April or whatnot, but like none of this, Zoom's not new, Apple Pay is not new, none of this technology is new. It's the adoption that's new and the acceleration of people wanting to adopt it for a variety of reasons. And so to me, it's sort of like, yeah, work from home before was different than it is now because of the adoption of all this new technology and new ways we can communicate and interact. So I was kind of a supporter, and now I'm way more of a supporter. And the same is true for, a lot of the other technology that we've adopted to make our lives make more sense right now.
So, I mean, I view you as a very self-motivated high performer. Not everybody's built like that. So to that end, how are you keeping your edge? When you're doing this for this long, developing a rhythm and getting, sharpening your saw from time to time. But how are you keeping your edge and in a job where you have to be innovative and strategic and have your head on your shoulders? What are you doing to keep the edge?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if melatonin is an appropriate answer, but it's I go to bed pretty early so I can stay energized all day. No, I think, keeping up to date on like reading what's going on, following interesting websites, podcasts, and all that. It's just really energizing for me, right? So like I just got a beta test of a product called Have you heard of
I have not heard of no.
Yeah, it's cool. It's just like basically a plugin for Zoom that allows for really cool and engaging and fun presentation options, right? So stuff like that like is super random, and I get to beta test it, and it's fun and interesting, and it's super energizing for me. So I don't know that I'm doing anything special aside from just like staying really engaged with my work, because it's what I'm really excited about. And as another example, like right now I get to work on one of the work streams that the league is doing. The league has dozens of work streams that are just using like cross-functional people to bring ideas together and try to sort of solve problems across the league. And it's so fun and it's so interesting, and thinking about how our business looks different in the future is so energizing to me. That's actually why I need to take melatonin, because I like get so amped up and so excited. And because I have two young kids, I end up working at night often, and am all jazzed about the stuff I get to do. So it's a super dorky answer, but
I mean, it's real though. I think that's the thing that maybe these Zoom calls are doing too for us, is that your kids run into the picture, and sometimes your coworkers are like, hey, can you bring your daughters in? We want to see them. And you're like, no, I don't really want to do that right now, because they're not in the picture. I think that we're in a two-dimensional world, but it's opened us up a little bit more to accept all of these picadillos of normal life. So I think there's some things that will allow for, I hope, and adopt more going forward after this is more normalized. But
yeah,
it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a nice byproduct of it, if there is such a thing.
I totally agree. And like, as much as I love having my kids randomly jump into the frame sometimes, I also love having them at daycare where they aren't jumping into the frame. So
yes, that's where they should be. Like that.
From time to time.
Yeah. So if you weren't working in a sports job, if you weren't with a sports team, what, career-wise, what do you think you would be doing? Would it be CSR? Would it be some of the stuff that you've shown passionate about, or would there be something else that you would choose to do if you weren't working in professional sports?
So that's so funny. So in grad school, I didn't really talk about this when I talked about my past, but coming out of grad school, my options were the Timbers or the CIA. And so it was in hindsight, two very different paths. At the time, I was like, well, both seem interesting. So I went through like multiple interview rounds with the CIA, and for some, they recruited really heavily at my grad school because it was very language based and international. And so it was very common to have CIA recruits on campus at any moment. So it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Like, I knew plenty of people that went to work in Washington after grad school.
And you never heard from them again?
literally haven't heard from them again. Yeah. I don't even know if I want to talk about this. During the interview process, they were like, you can't tell anyone about this, blah, blah, blah. So it's so funny to think back on, because that was 10 years ago and I like haven't thought much about it, but I guess the answer is I'd be in the CIA if I wasn't in professional sports. Wow. But if I were to leave now, I think, because now I would not be joining the CIA. I think what I'm really energized around and passionate about is like life coaching, career coaching type stuff. Like, I love personality tests, and I love helping people learn more about themselves and their strengths, and, figure out what they can be really good at. And so I think I would do something like in that space. I'm not sure exactly what, but.
Not to geek out too much and go on a tangent, but what are your favorite personality tests? There's so many of them out there. Are there ones that you guys use more than others? Oh yeah, I do remember now. I've allowed you to talk about it. Go right ahead.
Let me geek out.
Yes.
No, I love it. So I have a friend and mentor who's somehow someone in their family started a lot of those like strengths tests. Mm-hmm. And so she had got me really into strengths, and just the idea that like people do better when they lean into their strengths, right? Which was sort of it was an ethos that my dad instilled in me pretty early on too, right? Like, as a soccer player, you don't have to be good at every position on the field. Like, I don't have to be a good goalie if I'm a center midfielder. So like, focus on being a great center midfielder and not being a better goalie. And it's sort of like, not to bring sports analogies in, but it's just helpful for me to think about things that way, right? Like, there's things I'm not good at, and like, it's actually a waste of time for me to try to get better at them rather than leaning into what I'm really good at and just getting better at that. So strengths tests for me are huge. But now I want to know what yours are.
Oh, it's let's see. I tried the Enneagram. I bought the wrong book, because when I start a book, I finish a book. Ooh. The one I got was super dry, and I like the idea that, hey, this is who I am under normal circumstances. This is who I am under duress. Like, yep. Different versions of you, and you kind of where you hedge, or whatever they call, when you go from one, 2 to 3 or 2 to 1. Beyond that, we got clients that are using a predictive index. I talked to my mother-in-law last weekend, a really exciting conversation about Myers-Briggs, which she's an educator, she loves the Myers-Briggs, and she started going, I am her 4 letters. And I'm not as into the Myers-Briggs as her, but
a lot to remember.
Yeah. I think for me, more importantly, I think it's a great a tool, not a weapon. As a headhunter, I've got organizations we work with, and I say, do not weaponize it. Use it as a tool, not a weapon, and we can be successful with it. If we try to weaponize it and start, knocking people out, even though you loved them and their references are fantastic, let's unspool that. Let's unwind what the concern is. It helps us identify it and clarify it, and then we will figure it out. But let's just not use it as a knockout tool, which sometimes people get a little lazy and use it that way, which makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think, and it kind of goes back to the point about strengths, right? Like every Enneagram has pluses and minuses. And so you can't weaponize it, because then you're also letting go of all the positives that person brings. And so, it's super simple, but kind of funny example. Jake and I are both Enneagram 7s. He's a 7 wing 6, I'm a 7 wing 8. So I'm a little bit more like direct, want to get stuff done, like make things happen. And he's a little bit more, I don't even know what a wing 6 is, but anyway, so we're both fundamentally 7s. We wake up Memorial Day weekend, and again, we have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we were just like, let's build a deck. We should have a deck outside. And so like most people would have thought about that ahead of time, made some kind of plan for it. And I don't even know what everyone would do, to be honest. But we literally just like walked outside and started pulling up pavers, and like took the kids to Lowe's and bought wood. Like we just kind of start doing it, because we come up with, we're just like, it's just how we operate. And it's just been so helpful that I know that about us, right? Rather than people are like, you guys are insane. And I think before I would have been like, are we insane? And now I'm like, nope, we're 7s.
Last question on the Enneagram. Do they recommend that you marry someone that's the same number, or do they say don't do that?
There's pluses and minuses to any combination. So I feel like,
all right,
you're gonna have your ups and downs regardless.
All right. So let me end on one of my kind of just favorite things to hear from people that I talk with. It's the best advice either that you give people career-wise, when you're giving career advice, you talk about career coaching and that being a passion, or the best advice you just receive, as it relates to something that has always stayed with you, whether it's new or old. What are the best pieces of advice that you give or get as it relates to kind of career minded work?
Let me flip it and ask you the same question first.
Wait, I'm interviewing you.
Yeah, but it's sort of a cop-out, because you have great insight and advice, and I feel like you should be sharing those with the world. So you go first.
Well, I give advice like all day, every day. It depends on everybody's specific situation. So it depends on their situation. I was giving my daughter's boyfriend advice the other day, just about being uncomfortable and doing something that he didn't, I think he's having problems with. And I thought, I heard this from Tom Garfinkel down at the Dolphins, that you make decisions based on courage, not fear. When you're feeling, because we all have it, at times where you go, I'm gonna think of my life as a little bit smaller, the small version versus the big version of my life. Like what's my potential? What could I do? And when you think about it that way and you go, it's going to be okay. Unless you're jumping out of a plane without a pack, or going into surgery unprepared and you're the doctor, right? For our lives, we'll be okay. So to me, on the spot, that's just one of my favorite pieces of advice. There's all kinds of other stuff that I could probably start talking about, but just because it means something and helps bring me back to center sometimes if I'm giving advice to somebody or myself taking that advice when I feel uncomfortable about something.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that was I have a similar sentiment in mind. I have sort of an example from my life and why I think it has played an important role for me. But I was trying to think about where that shift started for me, and I actually think this is so embarrassing, but I actually think it's from watching the Jim Carrey movie Yes Man. Have you seen that movie?
A long time ago. I mean, yeah, like 10, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Right, like in the early 2000s.
When he was still acting.
He's unbelievable. I went on a big Jim Carrey kick in my younger years, and I watched that movie with a friend, and we were both like, let's just say yes to everything. Like, let's say yes to everything that comes our way and just kind of see what happens. And it was so funny. Like, we just committed to doing it. I don't remember if it was like for a month or for however long, but it was so funny and so interesting. And I sort of adopted that into career stuff. So, you know, I just wouldn't let fear get in the way of an opportunity. And so, you know, as a really random example, actually with Mercy Corps, when I was in Columbia, they needed someone to implement a gender-based violence program for youth that used soccer and yoga around this curriculum around gender-based violence, particularly for kids coming back who have escaped like being in the FARC, right? So it's a pretty intense and pretty new world for me to be leading a brand new program and implementing a program around a country I'd never been to in a language that I had only learned how to start speaking 6 months prior. And I remember they were like, yeah, we don't have anyone that knows soccer. You seem like you can figure out yoga. We can teach you the curriculum and like, we'll bring you to all the places around the country to implement it. And I was just like, okay. And I remember like emailing or calling my mom and being like, I don't think I can do this. But to your point, like, I'm not jumping out of a plane without a pack. I'm with a great organization that knows what they're doing. Worst case scenario, I embarrass myself in my terrible Spanish. And best case scenario, we like help them implement this program around the country and reduce the gender-based violence that girls are experiencing. And, you know, it happened. It was great. I'm sure I embarrassed myself. Like, that is one thing I know, but like, it gave me a ton of confidence, right? To that, like, even the most ridiculous things that I don't think I'm capable of, like in some way I'm capable of doing, or at least figuring out how to do. And I think that is a message I try to impart on people, that like, we usually get in our own way, you know, more so than other people are getting in our way.
Well, I think that's a powerful way to end. I don't know a better note to end on than that. So, you know, a positive ending in a uncertain environment. So thank you so much for your time. You're a gracious guest. I enjoyed the backdrop and really good to catch up with you. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, Jeff.
All right. We'll see you soon.